We do want to go ahead and start things off and kick things off, most importantly, with a massive thank you for joining us today. We sincerely hope that you and your families are well at this time, and we're so grateful for you using your valuable time to join us today for the next in our new series of virtual events, Retravel Live, where we speak to industry experts about how collectively we can all work together to reshape the travel for the better. But without further ado, I think it's time we get into some introductions. So first off, I'd like to introduce you to our host today, Bruce Poon Tip. Bruce is the author of Looptail, an entrepreneur and philanthropist, but you might know him best as the founder of Gadventures. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be here.
Pleasure to have you. Today, Bruce is going to be joined by a very special guest, Dr. Jane Goodall, the founder of the Jane Goodall Institute, Jane Goodall's Roots and Shoots youth program, and a UN messenger of hope. At the age of 26, Jane Goodall followed her passion for animals in Africa to Gombe, Tanzania, where she began her landmark study of chimpanzees in the wild. Her discovery in 1960 that chimpanzees make and use tools rocked the scientific world and redefined the relationship between humans and animals. In 1977, Dr. Goodall established the Jane Goodall Institute, which continues the field research in Gombe and builds on Dr. Goodall's innovative approach to conservation. Today, Dr. Goodall speaks about the threats facing the chimpanzees, environmental crises, and most of all, her reasons for hope. Welcome, Dr. Goodall.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to join you.
Thank you. And on that note, Bruce, I'll pass it to you to begin the conversation.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Jane, for being with us. I'm so excited about this. I'm new to the moderator / interviewer side, and I'm usually on your side being interviewed. And there's a lot of pressure. I've gotten my social media is flooded with people wanting to ask you questions or telling great stories about how they've met you somewhere along the way. Or I've actually had someone just say, young people that have been in your Roots and Shoots programs and have been inspired by you. So, and we've had a ton of questions here, and we're not going to get to all. We have a limited amount of time. But first of all, you're obviously known originally for 1956, and when people think for a minute where the world was in 1956, and you decided to go to Africa to study, well, actually originally moved to Africa and then get the opportunity to study the behaviors of chimpanzees, and I guess that's what you're most known for. But your message is so much bigger now because you've gone, on to all of wildlife, beyond chimpanzees. You've become a UN messenger of peace. And you also are an authority and a leader in that the whole circle of life, I guess, where deforestation and conservation and preservation of wildlife habitats all kind of culminate with, our planet and, global warming and, climate change and issues like that. So it's become, you become such a powerful voice in, in habitat loss and, conservation and, it's gone so much more past that decision in 1956. But why don't we start by just asking, I know you travel 300 days a year, usually, but you've been in one place for 7 months. And how are you doing in isolation?
Well, I'm not exactly isolated. I'm in the home where I grew up, and my sister is here with her family. So we've been a family. And but, when I first was grounded, as I call it, I was frustrated and angry, actually.
Yeah.
Lecture tours being cancelled. I know my tour in Canada was cancelled, and various in Europe and, well, all over the world, actually. And then I thought, well, there's not much point being angry and frustrated. It's not helping anybody. So with my little JGI team, Jane Goodall Institute, we decided to create Virtual Jane. And Virtual Jane has been busier than any other time in my life, except perhaps the last few desperate days when I was trying to get my PhD thesis done. And it's much more exhausting, but, because I'm on looking at this silly little camera at the top of the screen for hours every single day doing Zooms and podcasts and Skypes and webinars and you name it, and video messages and writing articles and doing emails, and it just doesn't stop.
Yes, I think everyone is feeling that webinar fatigue, and suddenly hours don't matter. So when you work, you know, your hours of work. But now it seems everyone can, especially you who has such a global footprint and a global personality, people probably just reach out to you whenever it's convenient for them, and not considering what time zone you're in.
I have a little team who monitor that, so I don't have to do that.
Excellent. So the audience today is, you know, friends, fans, family, and travelers. But we have a lot of travel industry people that attend. And do you have any thoughts on just the travel industry actually, and you know, how you know, travel's obviously stopped, and we have an opportunity to rethink at the moment. And you know, there's a real push for how we're going to restart travel on the other side. What are your thoughts on the travel industry as in general, and you know, travel today?
Well, I think it's very fortunate that there is this pause and rethinking, and I think it had begun before the pandemic, which is, I guess, how your company started, because you realized that we need to do things differently. So as the world got wealthier and more people began to travel, in so many instances, they were destroying by sheer numbers the very places that they wanted to go and see because they were wild. And, you know, also many people who hadn't had the opportunity to learn about the places where they were going, and tour operators who simply wanted more people to get more money and didn't seem to care about the environment. So culturally and environmentally, travel was going wrong.
Right. And so, you know, today I want to kind of focus our limited time on the intersection between tourism, travel, holiday time, and wildlife. And, you know, where there's positive impacts and obviously where there's negative impacts. But in the last little while, have you noticed any, you know, directional change in general to the health of wildlife globally? Has it improved or declined outside of travel first?
Okay, well, outside of travel, really things have gone down as far as environmental destruction is concerned. On the other hand, awareness has gone up. And I think the reason that more people aren't actually rolling up their sleeves and trying to do something is the feeling of helplessness. There's so many problems, and you always hear think globally, act locally, but if you think globally, you don't have the energy to act locally. And that's why I began our youth program, Roots and Shoots, because if you get together with your friends, and it doesn't have to be children, it can be adults, and you think, what can I actually do where I am here now? Okay, I can clean a stream. I can raise money to help refugees. There's all kinds of things I can do. And get involved in something you're passionate about, realize it's making a difference. With Roots and Shoots, that's in 86 countries, it's making a difference everywhere. Then you dare think globally. So,
yes.
You know, there is more effort now made, and this pandemic has really given a push to the way that we have mistreated, disrespected animals and the environment, because we brought this pandemic on ourselves by forcing animals into closer contact with humans as we destroy their habitat, hunting them, eating them, killing them, trafficking them, selling them for food, for medicine, the exotic pet trade, selling them for their skins. And in these, and our factory farms, by the way, for domestic animals, all of these situations provide perfect environments for a pathogen like a virus to jump from an animal to a person. And if it bonds with a cell in that human, it may create a new so-called zoonotic disease. And if it's contagious, like COVID-19, well, it's led to this global pandemic.
Yeah. So bringing it back to travel just a bit. So we put out our animal welfare guidelines years ago with you and your organization, the Jane Goodall Institute, which was the first of its kind, actually. It was very revolutionary. We were so happy to have your group and your people involved in that, because when we started to take an audit, because we thought we were this ethical company that, looked at communities and cultural preservation, poverty alleviation. But when we just took an audit of animal welfare, we realized, we had so many problems, and it uncovered so many things. And we were so grateful to be able to work with you on that. So there's the obvious things like dolphin encounters and, elephant riding that were easy to kind of remove. Because of how these animals are treated, whether they're trained before to have humans on their backs, or or even when we looked at these orphanages suddenly all over the world where animals really weren't being reintroduced into the wild, and investigating further and asking more questions. But what about when it comes to wildlife and culture? I'd love to get your views on that. Like, for instance, when I think of when it's a really deep, rich part of a culture and a history, and travelers are wanting to experience culture and they want to learn about history. I think of like bullfighting, for instance, in Spain, which traditionally, and so they've changed it significantly, because they no longer, put the swords in the animals. It's more of a display, and they don't kill the animals like they used to adhere to modern day, ethical standards. But it's really an important part of their culture. So I had a harder time when we were doing the whole animal welfare audit, understanding and avoiding cultural impacts. Inti Raymi actually is another good one in Peru, which is a celebration of the sun gods and harvest. And there's a reenactment of the Inti Raymi festival of slaughtering a sacrifice of a llama to the sun gods, which the Incans did traditionally for years, for at the beginning of summer for a greater harvest. What are your views on the cultural kind of animal welfare issues?
Well, I honestly think it depends. Some of them are absolutely brutal. And a film was recently made called Gods in Shackles. And that's about the elephants that are used in the temples, where elephants are treated as gods. At least that's what people say, and that's what tourists go to see and take part in. But actually, the treatment is so cruel. It's absolutely terrible. And these elephants taken away from their parents and beaten, those things have to change. And tourism can play a major role by saying, well, if you continue to treat them that way, then we're not going to come and you won't get our dollars.
Yes.
So each one of those things that you mentioned has to be treated separately. You can't just sweep a broom over the whole lot and say, we got to clear. They're all different. And some, it's not too difficult to make sure that it's reasonably ethical. Others, it's almost impossible.
I agreed, and that's certainly something that I learned through that whole process. It was so eye-opening, actually, more than anything, when you start kind of looking, because we have adventures in over 100 countries, and over and hundreds of trips, and we started looking, like as I said, we've been using elephant orphanages for years, taking passengers, and realizing, it's more just entertainment, theater for tourism. When we start asking questions. But so again, I bring up that, the dolphin kind of encounters and those tourist attractions, they're very obvious. But do you have views on what about zoos and working animals, horse racing, these kind of things? Maybe you can just give some color on that, because, I mean, not that those are tourist attractions, but I think people have that question, and we've had that question from some of our people attending today.
Okay, well, horse racing and greyhound racing, the facts coming out about the way those animals are treated and what happens to them when they're no longer useful, that's shocking, and something has to change, and people are working on changing it. When it comes to zoos, there are some very, very good zoos, and the good zoo, one will have a suitable enclosure, caring and educated keepers, but in addition, many people have told me, well, I first got my love for animals and wanted to help them because I met the eye of an elephant or a chimpanzee in a zoo. And the best zoos are putting a lot of money into conservation out in the field. And also in a zoo, a veterinarian can learn about working with wild animals, and they're increasingly taking those skills out to help people trying to battle to save animals in the field. So again, it's zoos and zoos. Some zoos should be closed. They shouldn't exist. When you say, okay, this zoo's got to close, what are you going to do with all the animals? One leads to another problem.
I totally, I totally get this, because even the zoo issue was something that we learned so much about when we started doing an animal welfare audit. I mean, there's just so many different levels of zoos. There's people that have accommodations that have like, zoos on their hotels and they don't have the skills or the knowledge to take care of animals. And then there's professional zoos that are businesses, and then there's actually education centers. So let's move into the pandemic, because we're forced into this pandemic. We're all kind of at home, grounded, as you said. And so we've read stories of wildlife being spotted in places that they haven't been seen before or in a long time because of the decrease in human activity. Is this pandemic really a break that nature needed, or is the lack of tourism more increased poaching because the conservation that tourists once brought to protect the animals is not there? What are your thoughts there?
Well, certainly in some places, the lack of tourism indeed has led to increased poaching in two ways. One, the government or the national parks or whatever hasn't got the revenue coming in from tourism to actually pay the rangers who are there to look after the animals. And so the international cartels can come swooping in and kill an elephant or a rhino with very little opposition, although people are working very, very hard to get the money and equipment out to those rangers. There's wonderful organizations working on that. But the other problem is local people were being paid by tourism. There's guides or in hotels and so on, lodgers, and they're not being paid anymore. And so they're going into the parks and poaching animals just simply to keep alive, to eat. So it's in some places, I think it's benefited the animals, but in other places it certainly hasn't.
And so what are some of the common mistakes people make when it comes to animals and tourism? Maybe what should people avoid? Do you have any tips?
Well, one of the things to avoid, the problem I said earlier is, more and more people are becoming tourists, and money's, they're getting wealthier. And so I talked to somebody the other day before the pandemic, and he said, I'd saved up for ages to get to the Serengeti, and I was so excited. And he said, I was out with my guide, we got up early, and it was my first day there, and a message came through on the radio because the guides all talk to each other. The pride of lions on a kill, and I was so excited, he said. And then I got there were 22 combis in a complete circle around those lions. And he said, you couldn't even get a photograph. And he said, it was so disappointing, I didn't want to travel anymore. So the secret is tourism that's controlled as regards numbers, number of people allowed in, and how long they can stay, and that sort of thing, which is tough. But it has to be, because
but it can be done. I mean, it is done in certain places like the Galapagos, or
like the mountain gorillas. Yeah.
And the mountain gorillas. Yes, that brings up a good point. I see a question here from someone watching right now about your thoughts on permits for, and she actually mentioned, this anonymous, about mountain gorilla permits where it's timed, right? You have like an hour or two to find the gorillas and spend time with them. To me, that's also, it's very important, but some people think it then becomes somewhat of an amusement park when you're buying tickets or permits. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it has to be limited somehow. And Gombe, it's not limited very well. It's nothing to do with us. And sometimes you get 16 people. They are in the 3 groups. You're allowed to be 6 people and a guide. But sometimes there's only 1 chimpanzee anywhere near where people can get. And all of those 3 groups congregate around 1 female and her infant, which is terrible. With the gorillas, however, they always know where they are. And so it's not too bad. And most people I've spoken to who've been there and done it have been very satisfied. They didn't want to spend more time, and they got close to the gorillas and enjoyed it. So it depends on the animal, depends on how much you have to pay. And I think with the gorillas, it's scaled. So the
Yes.
gorilla groups that are hard to get to, you pay less than the ones who are down nearer, the lower levels where you can find them quickly.
Yes. Well, that brings up a good point, more on the positive side. Maybe you can give the audience here some thoughts on how, when wildlife is observed correctly, how it actually aids in conservation and protection of wildlife, and how important that is. Because I know that even, the trophy hunting industry, which is really topical right now, always, uses the reason for it, that it somehow aids and helps conservation, which I don't understand. But just generally, maybe you can give your thoughts to people about, when you travel. I know.
Yeah, I mean, starting with the trophy hunting, as you say, you don't understand it. I don't understand it. It does not help conservation. They are actually hunting for endangered species, and they're killing like the lions with the biggest manes, and that alters the gene. They say they kill the oldest animals that are post-reproductive. They don't. They haven't a clue, and it's absolutely shocking. But for the responsible tourism, one, it takes foreign exchange in, so the central government is happy. Two, it helps to pay the staff and the rangers who can actually protect the animals. Three, there's no question but that people who go on these tours come back with a passion for helping conservation, many of them anyway, because I've met so many. So responsible tourism, I think, is something that's necessary and important.
Yeah. So what do you think is, in your opinion, is the biggest animal welfare challenges that the travel industry and travelers, and how we can make a positive impact?
Well, I think it's, too many tourists getting too close to animals. And sometimes, for example, the little bat-eared fox, they're so charming. And I spent time studying them when I was in Ngorongoro Crater. And I would say quite far away, and they're just always playing, and the young ones having tugs of war with feathers. And they were quite habituated. So a tourist car would come up and get very close. And the foxes weren't frightened, but they would just curl up and go to sleep. And so you could see this huge effect on the behavior of the animals. And I know this is true with dolphins. They kind of like swimming with people. But if there's too many people all the time, they're getting thin because they're not able to hunt properly. So in each case, you just have to, find out about the way the animal behaves, the effect on the animal, and all the rest of it. Yeah. And sometimes you're fighting the government of a country that doesn't want to listen to you. Well, if I make so much money out of 12 tourists, I'm going to make double money out of 24.
Yeah. Now let's just look on past the pandemic. Like, we're all in a place now where we're in hibernation in the travel industry and waiting for travel to start up again. And we've touched on controlled tourism and permits, and people are talking about slow tourism, people taking longer trips and not as many trips, because people are, the pandemic has kind of opened people's eyes to the planet and the work that we're putting the planet through with global travel. Do you have any thoughts on that, how the travel industry or travel can look on the other side of this pandemic, the opportunities?
Not really, because for one, I can't quite see beyond the pandemic at the moment. An awful lot of travel companies, and I'm sure have gone under. They don't exist anymore. So, it comes up, it's an ethical problem, because you don't want to ban people of lower income brackets from going out and seeing a wild animal. But on the other hand, those people then go on package tours, which means there's many of them. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough about it, but it's, okay. I know from being on the ground, the effect that it can have when you get too many people. And if you only have a few, then it's much more expensive. So I don't know that's your job. You look how it happens after the pandemic, not me.
Agreed. One of the most popular questions we've had, and we had so many from people prior to that submitted before this, was about people asking how they can help. The people that were concerned about wildlife suffering as a result of the loss of income because there's no tourism at the moment. Do you have any advice for people on how they can help from their homes beyond donations? Like
Beyond
obviously,
donations, it's difficult because, donations are really what's keeping some of these parks actually going. People have donated to the ranger forces like the Thin Green Line and World Ranger Association, things like that. So beyond donations, I don't know, getting involved in our Roots and Shoots program so that young people are learning about all the problems and they're really good at coming up with solutions. And so if you get a group of university students, high school students, talking about the question you just asked, you'd be surprised what they probably come up with. And, it's my biggest hope for the future is the young people, once they understand the problem and they are empowered to take action, it's incredible what they're doing.
it is. I agree. And I've had an experience mentoring with your Roots and Shoots program. It's incredible. Where would you like to see human and wildlife interaction go in the future of travel and conservation, especially with the opportunity of rethinking things after this pandemic?
Well, I would like to see, one idea that I've always had for a long time is people just go to the big national parks and they all congregate, like I've said, around the lions, or they distress the bat-eared foxes, or they swim with dolphins. But there's so many other places where tourists haven't been. And I've always wanted to develop a little network of like little rest houses where small groups of people could go. And although we're not supposed to interfere with nature, it's better to interfere than to lose a forest. So we go into a forest. If you put out little bits of food at night, then you see the night animals, the smaller, fascinating night animals, the civets and the genets and the pangolins. This is a whole new area where people would love to go if it was set up. And I always think, in Africa anyway, the Roots and Shoots groups could do that habituation of the animals. And I've seen it at Gombe. We used to sit when I was there with my son, we'd put a lamp outside, the animals don't care two hoots, and we put out just a little food, and they had an order of coming. And we saw the most lovely behavior.
And so a lot of the questions that we have are from travel providers and travel agents, and they want kind of advice that you could give when they're dealing with customers. They have a customer in front of them that wants a wildlife experience or wants to go and see another culture or country. They want your advice on how they can I guess set expectations and avoid disappointments with wildlife experience, and what your thoughts on that could be.
Well, I was reading a long article the other day about the things that go wrong with this, and that is that so many of the operators never talk about the negative side because they want the people, they want the customer. So they paint a very rosy picture, and they don't really tell the people who might not go if they realize that their going would be distressing to the animal, or, that the tourism around, like going to visit the Maasai, you have the Maasai village where tourists go. Those people are dead. It's not their culture. They're like little acting puppets, and it's tragic. So, and again, this isn't my job. I can see what goes wrong, but it's your job and your people who have to try and work out. We can sit and talk about it, and we can bring in the people on the ground and see what they think. How would you like people to understand your culture? What would you like them to do? Would you like them to come and visit you? Are you happy with it?
Yes.
How can it work?
So we are running out of time. There's so many questions that people are asking, and we obviously can't get to them, and people submitted before. You're obviously loved and adored. There's so many stories here, Jane, of how people love you or have met you. And they, everyone wants to just know you better. I've got these, like, to just get away from travel for a second. I've got like what I'm calling the fast five, just 5 questions that have just fun questions that people could maybe just learn a little bit more about you. First one is, these are fast questions. What's your favorite movie?
Oh gosh, Lord of the Rings.
All right, good answer.
Uh,
What about music?
I have to say a new one, which is The Octopus, my teacher.
Okay, I'm writing that down.
It's absolutely unbelievable. It's one
Okay.
of the best movies ever, and it's getting you know, prizes all over the place. It's really incredible.
I wrote that down and I'll be watching it for sure. What about music? Do you listen, what's your favorite type of music, or what's your favorite song at the moment? However, what music are you listening to right now?
Well, I haven't really got a favorite song. I like listening to classical music, you know, the good
Okay.
old Beethoven and Mozart.
Okay. Okay, 3 people dead or alive that you'd like to have dinner with.
3 people dead or alive I'd like to have dinner with. I'd like to have dinner with Mahatma Gandhi. I'd like to have dinner with the living Pope. And I'd like to have dinner with my grandfather, who sounded amazing but was dead before I was born.
Oh, excellent answer. Your favorite place to go on vacation? I know you travel so much for work, and I feel you there. But what about vacation? Where's the best place you've been on vacation, or you go regular vacation?
Vacation.
Okay. What is vacation?
Honestly, since 1960, I haven't actually had a vacation. I mean,
Well, we got to fix that. You come to us for vacation. Then what about is there a place you want to go next?
there isn't. I want to find out next what happens after I die, because either there's nothing, that's the end, or there's something. And if there's something, which I happen to believe there is, then what an amazing adventure. But I'm afraid you can't do anything about that one in your.
No, not in my business. Who inspired you? Do you have mentors, or who inspires you?
You know, when I grew up, it was wartime, and there was no TV invented. So my heroes were in books: Dr. Dolittle, Tarzan. But you know, I had a huge mentor was my mother, and she's always here behind me. But my greatest teacher of all time, who really helped me stand up to the professors at Cambridge who told me I couldn't talk about animals having personality, minds, or emotions. The teacher who enabled me to have the courage to stand up against them, because I hadn't been to college, and this was a PhD, and they were erudite professors. And here he is, my dog, Rusty. And if you share your life in a meaningful way with a dog, a cat, a guinea pig, a rabbit, a horse, a pig, a rat, you know that we are not the only beings with personalities, minds, and emotions.
Powerful, and that's I was going to leave it on that as a perfect way to leave, because we're out of time. But you know, it's amazing because our travelers and you know, our audience are very active, and there's a lot of questions here about your Roots and Shoots programs for adults. Does that exist, or is it just for kids?
We have quite a few adults forming groups. Anybody can form a group.
Okay, and so that is available. I've got that question a few times, and everyone seems to be interested in your Roots and Shoots program. So I'm going to just say thank you, Jane, for the time, but I'm going to just do a plug for you. Because if anyone wants to, you know, support Jane and her work, the Jane Goodall Institute has chapters all over the world. And Roots and Shoots is a program that engages young people and encourages them to you know, develop their ideas and become warriors in their local communities. I've been part of that myself as a volunteer mentor at some of your Roots and Shoots program. They're super inspiring, and it's amazing the work that you're doing. So anyone who wants to support Jane Goodall, the Jane Goodall Institute is where you would go. Jane, just thank you. Chris is going to come back on with us in a second. But Jane, thank you. I got to see you twice this week, and I feel so fortunate. I haven't seen you in so long. Actually, it's been a few years. Thank you for all the support you give us. Thank you for everything you do.
I want to say to everybody, never forget that every single day you live, you make an impact on this planet, and you have a choice as to what kind of impact you make. Every day. What choices do you make? What do you eat, buy, wear, and so on?
Excellent. Chris?
There you have it. I think if everyone out there is feeling like me right now, we're super inspired. So thank you to everyone who joined us today. Again, to Bruce's point, if you'd like more information about the fantastic work being done by the Jane Goodall Institute, please visit www.janegoodall.ca. And to check out Gadventures' collection of wildlife-focused trips, all endorsed by Dr. Goodall, please visit www.gadventures.com. And lastly, this is the second event in our Retravel Live series, where we'll be addressing the most pressing topics in travel and together looking at how we can solve them so we can retravel the right way. Visit retravellive.com to sign up for more information on future events. Again, thank you so much to Dr. Goodall. Bruce, I'll pass it to you to wrap this up.
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for attending. Thank everyone for supporting Gadventures, especially Jane, your work, as well as the support of the Institute, who has supported us beyond our animal welfare guidelines. I'm just going to put out a personal challenge to everyone attending. I know we're over time a bit. You know, Jane's work has expanded way beyond what she originally set out to do when she left England in 1956 and started, the observation of chimpanzees. But her message is so important, and as she's grounded, we are all part of her message. And I challenge everyone out there who's watching to go out and meet people and talk about her message. You know, Jane's legacy is everything right now. All the work that she's done for the last 60 years, it's important that we all carry that message now. And, you know, again, beyond the chimpanzees, it's the messenger of peace and hope, and that the connection between wildlife and, conservation, and, how the planet is all linked and how we're all part of this planet. We have to share it. And we all have to live, it's about equality for all living beings. And her message is so clear. And I just challenge everyone who's watching to find, 3 or 4 people that you know and have that conversation and spread Jane's message. Because, Jane spends 300 days a year on the road, and she's been doing that for decades, trying to get her message out. But we are more powerful as a community, and we can be, we can carry her message and help, make her legacy known all over the world in our communities. So thank you again, Jane. That's all I have to say at the end. And Jane, do you want to say something in the very end? I don't want to let you go.
Well, I would like to say thank you too. It's been fun having this conversation, and thank you for promoting the Jane Goodall Institute and Roots and Shoots, because especially Roots and Shoots is my passion. And there are 34 Jane Goodall Institutes around the world, so most people can get involved in one or the other. 86 countries for Roots and Shoots, and everybody makes a difference every day. And I will end up, the last word shall be the people who never get involved in something like this, but you would hear it if you came to Gombe National Park, and it would be a chimpanzee voice, bringing the voice of the animals we all love into this meeting. And
I love that. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, everyone, for attending.